Alone on a quiet night, a person can feel the weight of the world pressing in. What happens when every familiar voice fades and you have no one left but God? It's a question that can send a chill down your spine. Perhaps you felt this way yourself. Maybe you're going through a season where the people you counted on have disappeared, or a situation where none of your efforts seem to help. It's a frightening place to be. Isolation is often seen as something to fear, a barren wasteland of silence. Yet deep in that silence, beyond the fear and emptiness, there lies a profound encounter waiting to happen. The idea of having no one but God can sound like utter despair, but it might just be the beginning of something transformative. We often cling to our friends, family, and the comforts of daily life as lifelines. So when those supports fall away, it can feel as if the ground is crumbling beneath our feet. But what if losing everything else is exactly what opens our eyes to something greater? History and faith tell stories of people who walked through loneliness only to discover they were never truly alone. The world may have abandoned them, but in that sacred solitude, they found strength not their own, hope in the darkest hour, and a presence that would never forsake them. This journey into solitude is not a tragedy. It's a sacred rite of passage. When a man has no one left but God, he steps onto holy ground without even realizing it. In that place, the noise of life quiets down and eternal truths ring louder. In the following sections, we will explore how trials of isolation can refine a soul. We'll see how men of faith throughout history were shaped in silence, and how even today, your loneliest moments can become the very moments that draw you into unshakable faith. You're about to see that what feels like loneliness might actually be the setting of a miracle in the making. Let us step into this journey with open hearts, ready to find meaning in the solitude and discover the power that emerges when God is all we have. #Sacred Solitude, when God is all you have. When a person reaches the point of having no one left but God, something extraordinary happens. The ties to this world that once felt so vital begin to loosen. The approval of people, the security of material things, the little comforts we cling to, all these start to fall away. What's left is not a void as we might fear, but a sacred space of profound significance. In this solitude, a man finds that his soul's dependence shifts entirely to the one constant that remains, the living God himself. In that sacred solitude, eternity becomes more tangible than ever. Without the constant input from the world, your perspective shifts to what truly matters. You begin to realize that your soul's true home is not in the applause of people or the accumulation of things, but in the presence of God that meets you there. #Lessons from men of faith in isolation. This pattern is not new. Many of the greatest figures of faith were forged in times of isolation. Consider Abraham, who walked away from everything familiar, solely to follow the voice of God he could not yet see. Think of Joseph, betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and left to languish in prison, all before the glorious vision God gave him finally came true. Remember Elijah, who stood on a mountaintop, completely alone, against a king and hundreds of false prophets, defending the truth when no one else would. Each of these men walked through the wilderness of loneliness, but their loneliness was the very furnace that refined their faith. Each of these stories ended in victory. Abraham became the father of a nation, Joseph saw his God-given dreams fulfilled, and Elijah witnessed God's fire from heaven vindicate the truth. Their time of loneliness proved to be the doorway to God's mighty intervention. Refined by solitude's fire. Those great men walked through the fire of solitude, but not one of them was truly alone, and neither are you. It may feel like abandonment, but in reality, you are being refined, not rejected. You are not forsaken at all. You are being lovingly prepared. In this very moment, God is at work within you in ways no one can see yet. Because of that, you must not lose hope. Do not give in to despair and do not curse these quiet days. The silence you're experiencing has a purpose. Instead of running from it, trust that God is using it to purify your heart like gold in a furnace. Just as he was present with Abraham on lonely paths and with Joseph in prison cells, he is present with you now. This season of solitude is part of your story, not the end of it. A chapter where your faith is proven genuine and strong. So do not despise this season of healing. and do not be impatient to escape it. God is working in these days of waiting. If you lean into this process, you will find Him purifying your heart and stripping away what is not needed, leaving your faith more genuine and your life more grounded in Him. Something holy in the silence. It may be tempting to flee from the quiet, empty spaces, but do not run from the stillness. Stay with it because something sacred is happening there. When the rest of the world leaves you behind, when friends drift away, and even loved ones cannot understand what you're facing, that silence becomes a sanctuary. It's often at the very moment you feel you cannot take one more step, when you stand on the brink of utter exhaustion and cry out, "God, I can't go any farther," that heaven responds in power. In these desperate moments, God does not remain distant. He draws near with strength you didn't know you could have. Suddenly, He's can find you right in the middle of the storm. Notice that God's answer isn't always to stop the storm or magically remove every struggle. Instead, He shows you He is there, walking on the waves beside you. Remember how Peter in the Bible stepped out of the boat onto a raging sea? As long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he stayed above the waves. In the same way, in your storm, God is inviting you to look at Him. Your circumstances may not immediately change, but your perspective does. You see the Almighty at your side. This is the kind of faith that isn't built in times of comfort, but in times of contradiction. When everything around you insists that you're alone and defeated, faith declares the opposite. You are held by God, and He is not finished with you yet. In the middle of the fire, a faith refined by hardship, a fire-tested belief, becomes unshakable. Throughout history, God has made it clear that He shows up not just when conditions are favorable, but when all other options have failed. He does not wait for an audience or for perfect timing by human standards. The Lord can step straight into a prison cell to stand beside a captive, just as He was with Joseph and later with Paul in jail. He can send an angel to shut the mouths of hungry lions, as He did for Daniel. He can walk amid the flames of a fiery furnace, as He did with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Time and again, God demonstrates that no situation is too dire and no place is too isolated for His presence. Importantly, God does not wait until after the crisis has passed to arrive. He enters right into the middle of our hardest moments. When everything and everyone else has fallen away, He remains. This is His pattern, showing up precisely when hope seems lost, bringing deliverance and comfort when it's needed most. You might not see Him yet, but do not doubt that He is right there with you in the heat of your trial. He sees your struggle. You might be reading this and thinking, "This sounds wonderful, but no one really understands what I'm going through." Perhaps you feel completely overlooked in your pain. It can seem like the people around you notice your successes or your strength, but they don't see the secret battles you fight, or the sleepless nights you endure. You smile on the outside, and everyone assumes you're fine. Meanwhile, inside you started to believe a painful lie, that you have to carry this burden all by yourself. Let me assure you, you do not have to carry it alone, and you were never meant to. Even if every human friend has failed you or cannot see your hurt, there is one who sees it all. God notices every tear and hears every unspoken groan of your heart. The Bible tells us that He is the kind of friend who sticks closer than a brother, the kind of father who will never abandon his child. He has promised, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." Even now, His eyes are on you. He sees the wounds and the worries that no one else notices. Remember, not even a sparrow falls to the ground without God noticing. How much more is He attentive to you, His beloved child? His everlasting arms are underneath you, ready to catch you whenever you stumble. And in this very moment, through the silence, God is whispering to your heart, "You belong to me. You have not been forgotten, and you are never alone." The cry that moves heaven. Sometimes it takes reaching the very end of your rope to pray the truest, rawest prayer of your life. This isn't the neatly worded prayer you might utter in public, or the routine blessing said out of habit. It's a desperate cry from the heart, born from absolute need. It sounds like, "God, I have nothing left. If you don't intervene right now, I cannot go on." This kind of prayer isn't polished or pretty. It's real and urgent, rising up from the ashes of your struggle. And do you know what? A cry like that reaches heaven and captures God's attention. Throughout the ages, God has been moved by the humble, desperate pleas of his children. When you finally let go of your self-reliance and call out with everything in you, that is when the door opens for God's grace to flood in. When you come to the end of yourself, you arrive at the beginning of God's limitless help. The Bible is full of examples of desperate prayers that touched God's heart, from Hannah weeping in the temple for a child to blind Bartimaeus shouting for Jesus to have mercy on him. None of them were ignored by God. Grace at the end of yourself. What exactly rushes in when we make that desperate plea? Grace, and not a fragile, delicate idea of grace, but a powerful force from God. His grace is like an outstretched hand, pulling you up out of a pit. It arrives not because we have earned it or deserve it, but simply because God loves us. When your knees buckle under the weight of life, grace is what holds you up. When you have no strength left to walk, grace is what carries you forward. And when you've stumbled and fallen yet again, feeling like a failure, grace is there to wrap you in mercy and set you back on your feet. This grace is the very presence and help of God working on your behalf. It is stronger than every weakness of yours. You may not know what your next step should be or how to climb out of the darkness, but God's grace meets you right there. It is the unmerited favor and power of God doing for you what you could never do for yourself. No matter how low you feel, His grace can reach deeper still. It becomes the solid ground under your feet when everything else has given way. Remember this: if you have God, it is the unmerited favor and power of God. In this moment, it's every notion of a darkness that happens to you all the time. Remember this: if you have God, you can reach out. In this moment, it's every notion of a darkness that happens to you all the time. Remember this: if you have God, you can reach out. In this moment, it's right there. It becomes the solid ground under your feet when everything else has given way. Remember this: if you have God, you can reach out. In this moment, it's right there. Remember this: if you have God, you can reach out. In this moment, it's right there. It becomes the solid ground under your feet when everything else has given way. Remember this: if you have God, you can reach out. In this moment, it's where you have everything you truly need. When the world fades away, when people walk out, and when every door closes, God is still there. And if God is with you, that is enough. Think of the prodigal son in Jesus' parable. He came home at the end of his rope, expecting judgment, but instead his father ran to embrace him. That is what grace does. It meets us with open arms and unconditional love when we least deserve it. Beauty from ashes, hope and restoration. God's involvement in your life doesn't stop at merely standing with you in trouble. He is also a restorer. The same God who remains with you in the valley also works to rebuild you afterward. He will not leave you broken. In fact, He specializes in taking the shattered pieces of a life and creating something new and whole. Where you see only ashes of what was lost, God brings forth beauty. Where you feel only weakness, He imparts new strength. He turns your mourning into dancing and your weeping into joy. With God, every ending can become a new beginning. No matter how deep the pain or how long the sorrow has lasted, there is a future beyond it. God promises that your story isn't finished in the dark chapter. He is writing a new chapter filled with hope. For you, that means there is life after loss, hope beyond the heartache. The path to that new life won't be found in chasing the approval of others or filling your days with distractions. It will be found by drawing closer to God, the one who knows you completely, who knew you before you were born and counts every hair on your head. So do not despise this season of healing, and do not be impatient to escape it. God is working in these days of waiting. If you lean into this process, you will find Him purifying your heart and stripping away what is not needed, leaving your faith more genuine and your life more grounded in Him. When you seek Him in this season of brokenness, you'll discover that He has been working all along to bring redemption and purpose out of your pain. In the silence, truth emerges. We live in a world overflowing with noise, countless opinions, constant chatter, endless distractions. It's easy for truth to get drowned out in all that commotion. But when you find yourself alone with God, the noise begins to fade. In the quiet of His presence, all the lies and external pressures fall silent. What remains is what is real and eternal: God's voice of truth, His unfailing love, and His life-changing power. In these moments of solitude with God, He can speak to your heart more clearly than ever. His truth rises above the confusion, bringing clarity to your mind. His love becomes tangible, reassuring you that you are valued and cherished beyond measure. His power works within you, giving you the strength to change and the freedom that your soul desperately needs. The very solitude that once felt like a curse becomes the setting where God's truth sets you free. In the stillness, God also allows you to see yourself more clearly, your fears and wounds, but also the gifts and strength He's given you. He doesn't reveal these things to condemn you, but to heal and free you with His truth. Looking back with gratitude, believe it or not, a day will come when you can look back on this lonely season and actually feel thankful for it. Instead of bitterness or regret, you will feel gratitude. Why? Because you will recognize what this time has accomplished in you. You might even find yourself saying something like, "It was in that quiet loneliness that I finally learned how to hear God's gentle voice. It was in that darkest valley that I discovered the brightest light of His presence. When I truly had no one else, I realized that God was, and is, all I ever really needed." Experiences that felt unbearable now will later be remembered as holy moments of growth. The very pain that threatened to break you will become proof of how God sustained you. You will see how your faith deepened and your character was shaped in ways that could not have happened in the noise and comfort of easier times. This perspective of gratitude is one of the beautiful gifts that come from enduring a trial with God by your side. You will thank God for the valley that once made you weep, because it led you to a joy and relationship with Him that you could not have found otherwise. A testimony forged in fire. When you emerge from this season, you will not be the same person who entered it. You will rise up carrying something unshakable within you. God will have forged a testimony in you through the flames of adversity. You'll find that you can speak to others who are hurting with a new authority and compassion, not because you learned it from a book or a lecture, but because you lived it and felt it in your own bones. The peace you carry will calm chaotic ruins, and the hope radiating from you will breathe life into those who feel broken. People will inevitably ask how you made it through such a difficult time. They will want to know the secret of your endurance and strength, and you will be able to answer plainly and confidently, "I had no one but God, and God was enough." That simple, profound declaration will speak volumes. It will point people not to your own courage, but to the faithful God who carried you. Your survival and growth will become a beacon, testifying to what the Lord can do with a life entrusted entirely to Him. Ready for your calling. After all you've been through, you might wonder if you're somehow disqualified from a great future. Maybe you worry that you're too damaged or too far off course for God to use you. But hear this clearly: you are not disqualified, and you are not beyond repair. In fact, this very place of humility and total dependence on God is exactly where He can work a miracle in your life. When a man has no one left but God, he's actually in the perfect position to be used mightily by God. Why? Because now you are free from leaning on all the shallow supports that once propped you up. You're no longer addicted to the applause or approval of the crowd. You're no longer chasing after things that never truly satisfied your soul. You have learned to lean on the rock that never fails. And that means God can now build something incredible through you, because your foundation is firm in Him. Remember, God often chooses people who have been broken. Moses once thought his past failure, even committing murder in Egypt, had ruined God's plan, yet God called him at the burning bush. Peter denied even knowing Jesus on the night of the crucifixion, yet Jesus forgave him and made him a leader of the early church. No failure or flaw is too great for God to redeem. In truth, your brokenness makes you a better vessel for His glory, because now His power, not your own, will be the source of your success. Trust the author of your story, standing firmly on God, the solid rock. you have become the kind of person who cannot be easily shaken. Take heart that this difficult chapter is not the end of your story. In fact, it is the chapter that changes everything. The key now is to continue walking in faithfulness. Remain humble before God and ready to follow His lead. Stay available for whatever He calls you to do next. Be confident of this. God is not finished with you yet. He is still writing your story, and He writes with a masterful purpose. Right now, you might only see confusion or what looks like broken scribbles in the narrative of your life. But if you place your trust in the author, you will find that He knows exactly how to turn these rough pages into something beautiful. The same God who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion. He never leaves a story half-told or a promise unfulfilled. In time, you will see how He has woven all these strands, even the painful ones, into a redemption tale uniquely your own. Lessons from the wilderness. Throughout history, God often chose the wilderness as the training ground for His greatest servants. The wilderness represents those seasons of isolation and hardship where comforts are stripped away, leaving a person with only what truly matters. It's a place with no distractions, no applause, and no external validation, just a person alone with God. Far from being a curse, the wilderness is frequently the very setting where God works most powerfully to prepare someone for a greater purpose ahead. As the Apostle Paul taught, we can even rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, endurance produces character, and character produces hope. Such hope will not put us to shame, because God is working through it all. Moses, from exile to encounter. Moses is a powerful example. Before he could lead a nation to freedom, Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness. He had fled Egypt as a fugitive, haunted by his past mistakes and unsure of his future. In that barren land, Moses learned humility and dependence on God. Day after day of tending sheep in solitude taught him patience and stripped away the pride and impulsiveness of his youth. It was only after those long years of obscurity that God appeared to Moses in a burning bush, commissioning him for an extraordinary task. Moses realized that his life story was part of a much bigger plan. Had he stayed in the palaces of Egypt, surrounded by comfort and power, he might never have learned the lessons that the wilderness taught him. The loneliness wasn't punishment, it was preparation for a destiny that would change history. Satric, David, a king molded in caves. David, too, experienced a wilderness season on his way to the throne. Though anointed as a young man to be the future king of Israel, David did not ascend to the throne immediately. Instead, he spent years on the run from King Saul, hiding in caves and wandering the wilderness to save his life. During those lonely years as a fugitive, David's character was being forged. He learned to rely on God for protection and guidance. In that period of exile, David also poured out his heart in poetry and song. Many of the psalms were written in those desperate times. Those songs reveal raw emotions: fear, sorrow, hope, and trust. Had David gone straight to being king without these trials, he may not have developed the deep compassion, faith, and wisdom that later defined his reign. The hardships he endured in solitude prepared him to be a leader who trusted God, not just his own strength or military might. Joseph, dreams redeemed through suffering. Another powerful example is Joseph. As a young man, Joseph was given dreams by God of a great destiny. But before those dreams came true, Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and later unjustly thrown into prison. In those dark years, Joseph had every reason to lose hope. He found himself utterly alone in a foreign land, suffering for crimes he didn't commit and with no end in sight to his misery. Yet, Joseph did not turn his back on God. He held on to his faith that God was still with him, even in the dungeon. Years later, Joseph's situation changed overnight. He was raised from the prison to a position of great power in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. He used that position to save countless lives from famine, including the very family that had betrayed him. Looking back, Joseph could see that every trial had been part of God's plan. What his brothers meant for evil, God used for good. As Joseph himself said, the betrayals and isolation had actually positioned him perfectly to fulfill his calling. Joseph's story shows that even when our circumstances scream that God has forgotten us, He is still working to bring about his promises. Joseph emerged from his trials not only vindicated, but with a compassionate heart and a testimony that God can redeem any situation. Even if your wilderness looks different, perhaps a season of grief, uncertainty, or waiting, the principle remains the same. These wilderness seasons in our lives are not dead ends, they are launching pads for what lies ahead. Just as God eventually called Moses out of Midian and David out of the caves at the appointed time, he will also lead us out of our wilderness seasons when the time is right. In the meantime, the wilderness is accomplishing something vital within us, teaching us to rely solely on God, refining our faith, and allowing us to discover strengths and insights we never knew we had. When God's timing comes to bring you into the next chapter, you will step into it prepared and equipped in a way you could not have been without the wilderness. Strength in weakness. Society teaches us to avoid any sign of weakness. We're often told to hide our struggles, to never let them see you sweat. Needing help can feel like failure. But in God's perspective, weakness is not something to be ashamed of. It is precisely in our moments of weakness that His strength can shine the brightest. When a person reaches the point of saying, "I can't do this anymore, I have nothing left," that is often the very moment he encounters a power beyond his own. The Apostle Paul learned this lesson personally. He faced a persistent struggle. He called it a thorn in the flesh, and he begged God to take it away. Yet God did not remove this hardship. Instead, the Lord spoke to Paul, saying, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Hearing this, Paul came to a startling conclusion. If that's the case, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Paul discovered that when he was weak, then he was truly strong in God. It was not in Paul's own strength or talent that God's glory shone, but in the space that Paul's weakness created for God's power to operate. This truth runs completely counter to the world's logic. The world says strength is in self-reliance and personal ability. Grind harder, push through by yourself. But God invites us to a different way. He calls us to surrender our self-reliance and trust in His power instead. It's not that God wants us to be defeated. Rather, He wants us to realize that true strength is not what we can do, but what He can do through us. Often it's only when we are at our lowest, when we have exhausted all our own resources, that we finally open ourselves fully to God's intervention. In that surrender, we stop depending on our own wisdom or strength and begin to lean entirely on Him. When we invite God's power into our weakness, we make room for Him to work in ways we never expected. His strength may not always manifest as dramatic miracles by human standards. Often, it comes as a steady, gentle, but unshakable force that carries us through. This divine strength gives us courage to stand firm when we feel like collapsing. It provides wisdom when we are utterly confused. It brings peace to endure when we are overwhelmed. God's strength is unlike human strength. It isn't about physical might or sheer willpower, but a quiet power that steadies the heart and mind. It sustains us when we cannot sustain ourselves. So if you find yourself in a place of profound weakness right now, do not despair. Do not believe the lie that you are failing or that you're not enough. In fact, you are in the very position where God loves to step in and do His greatest work. Remember, His strength is made perfect in your weakness. Trust Him in this season, and you will emerge on the other side stronger in faith, more dependent on Him, and more aware of the incredible power that comes only from God. To illustrate, consider a man named David. He had always prided himself on being strong and independent. But when a sudden illness left him bedridden and weak, David's world turned upside down. He couldn't work, couldn't take care of his family, and he felt utterly helpless. At first, he was angry with God for allowing this to happen. He pleaded for healing, but day after day he remained weak. However, in that weakness, something unexpected occurred. Unable to even get out of bed on his own, David began to sense God's presence in a new way. Friends from church came to pray with him and provide for his family. Bible verses he had learned as a child came back to his mind, giving him comfort each morning. Slowly, David realized that while he had lost his physical strength, he was gaining a spiritual strength he never knew he needed. He felt God carrying him through each day. Months later, when David recovered, he emerged with a humbler heart and a deeper faith. He would tell you that in losing his own strength, he found God's. His illness, which he once thought would break him, actually became the place where God's power lifted him up. Trusting God in the silence. Not every prayer is answered in the way or timing we expect. There are seasons when you might cry out to God and hear nothing in response. Those quiet, silent seasons can be some of the hardest to endure. It's easy to start wondering if God has abandoned you or if he's even listening at all. You might begin to feel that he is distant or unconcerned about your struggle. However, God's silence is not the same as his absence. Often, when it seems like nothing is happening, God is working behind the scenes in ways you cannot yet see. We live in a culture of instant gratification, where waiting feels unbearable. But God doesn't operate on our hurried timetable. Sometimes he intentionally allows a period of waiting, a divine pause, not to harm us, but to help us grow. In the silence, he teaches us to trust him beyond what our eyes can see or our ears can hear. The Bible provides examples of this truth. The Israelites endured generations of slavery in Egypt, crying out for deliverance. For a long time, it seemed heaven was quiet. But God had not forgotten them. At the right moment, he raised up Moses to lead them out with a mighty hand. Similarly, during their wilderness journey to the Promised Land, there were times they wondered if God had forgotten them, as they faced hunger, thirst, and fear. Yet God was there all along, orchestrating their deliverance in his own time and shaping them as a people. Even Jesus experienced what appeared to be divine silence. In the Garden of Gethsemane, overwhelmed with sorrow, Jesus prayed fervently. And on the cross, in a moment of unimaginable agony, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" To onlookers, it might have seemed that the Father was silent as Jesus suffered, but in reality, God's plan of redemption was reaching its climax. The apparent silence of God at the cross did not signify abandonment. It was the fulfillment of his perfect will for the salvation of the world through Jesus' sacrifice. God's silence, then, is often a sign that he is doing something deeper. It is an invitation for us to trust his character, even when we can't trace his actions. In the silence, our faith is tested and refined. Will we continue to believe in God's goodness even when we don't get immediate answers? Will we remain faithful when our feelings tell us he is distant? These are critical questions in our spiritual journey. If you are in a season where God seems quiet, hold on to what you know of his character. Remember that he is good, loving, and faithful. Remind yourself of his past faithfulness in your life. Know that a delay is not a denial. Much like a seed beneath the soil, God's work often takes time to become visible. When the time is just right, he will speak. He will act, and you will see the wisdom of his timing. Until then, continue to trust him. His silence is not neglect. It is care in disguise, preparing you for the next step. Consider a woman named Sarah. For years she prayed for a child, and for years she was met with silence. She watched others celebrate miracles while her own arms remained empty. There were nights she would sit in the quiet of her living room, asking God through tears why he hadn't answered her. She felt like heaven had gone silent on her deepest desire. But despite the silence, Sarah clung to her faith. She continued to pray and to believe that God was good. Even though she didn't understand his timing, in the waiting, something changed in Sarah. She found herself growing more compassionate to others who were hurting, and she drew closer to God, trusting him with her pain. Eventually, in God's timing, Sarah's prayer was answered. She became a mother. But looking back, she realized that the years of quiet waiting had shaped her heart in necessary ways. She was not the same person she'd been when she first began praying. The silence taught her to trust God completely, and when the blessing finally came, she treasured it all the more and gave God the glory. Faith and hope, anchors in the storm. In the midst of uncertainty, faith and hope act like twin anchors for your soul. These are not mere positive feelings. They are lifelines given by God to keep you steady. Faith is the choice to trust God's character and promises, even when you can't see what he's doing. Hope is the confident expectation that God will fulfill those promises and that better things are coming. Faith is the foundation. It says, I believe God is good and he is with me, even though my situation looks bad right now. It means trusting that God's word is true, that He will never leave nor forsake you, and that He is working all things together for good. Faith often requires stepping forward without knowing the whole plan, much like Abraham did when he left his home, or like Peter stepping out of the boat onto the water. It is holding on to God's unchanging hand in the middle of a storm. Hope grows out of that faith. If faith is the root, hope is the fruit. Hope gives you the vision to look beyond your present pain. It reminds you that God's story for your life is not finished yet. Hope whispers to your heart that no matter how hard things are today, tomorrow is in God's hands and good things are on the way. As Scripture says, we were saved in hope. And if we hope for what we do not yet see, we wait for it with patience. This kind of hope empowers you to endure. It keeps you from giving up because you know there is meaning in the struggle and light on the other side. Through every trial, God is shaping you into the person you need to be for the next chapter of your journey. Your struggles are not wasted. They're the refining process that teaches you perseverance, deepens your compassion, and strengthens your faith. The hardships you face today are equipping you for the purpose God has for you tomorrow. When you hold on to faith and hope, you cooperate with God's work, allowing Him to use every challenge as preparation for your destiny. Or think of a young man named Alex. He felt God leading him to move to a new city to serve in a ministry, even though he had no friends or family there and only a few dollars in his bank account. It made no logical sense to go, but Alex had faith that God would provide for him if this calling was real. So, with a mixture of excitement and fear, he packed his bags and went. The first few weeks were hard. He slept on a couch in a church basement, worked odd jobs just to eat, and sometimes wondered if he'd made a mistake. But he kept praying and pushing forward, believing that God was in this. Over time, doors began to open. A family in the church offered him a spare room to stay in. He found a steady job that still allowed him to volunteer at the ministry. Bit by bit, everything he needed fell into place. Alex eventually became an integral part of that ministry, touching many lives. He often reflects that if he hadn't stepped out in faith into the unknown, he would have missed seeing God provide in miraculous ways. His bold move, guided by faith and hope, proved that God truly honors those who trust Him. Conclusion: a greater purpose ahead. At the end of all these trials, the solitude, the weakness, the waiting, and the silence, one truth emerges clearly. God has been at work the whole time. What felt like abandonment or aimlessness was actually a carefully guided process of growth. The weight of the world that nearly crushed you has, by God's grace, strengthened you in ways nothing else could. The silence that tested your faith has purified it, leaving only what is genuine and unshakable. So in those moments when you still feel isolated and the burden feels too heavy to bear, remember everything we have explored. Remember the examples of those who went before you and how their stories turned out. Hold on to your faith and your hope. Keep trusting that God is at work behind the scenes, even when you can't see any evidence yet. Continue putting one foot in front of the other, moving forward in faith. God is preparing you for something greater than you can imagine. In His perfect timing, the season will change. When God finally opens the door and invites you to step into the next chapter, you will find that you are not the same person who began this journey. You will be stronger, wiser, and more equipped to fulfill the calling that God has placed on your life. And when someone asks you how you survived, you will be able to smile and say, "I had no one but God, and He was enough." Truly, when a man has no one but God, he discovers that God alone is more than enough.